Heroin led Samantha to the brink of death and brought her to her knees. With treatment, support from her family, and those in long-term recovery, she has been able to overcome the horrors of addiction with over 6 years in active recovery. Good job. She recently completed her master's degree with honors from St. Joseph University and is happily married with 2 children. Samantha is a firm believer that treatment works and recovery is possible. She currently works for Summit BHC, and it is her life's passion to provide treatment and advocacy to those who are still struggling with the use of drugs and alcohol. Samantha. Woo!
Really obsessing about whether I wanted the little mic thing, like on the reality show, or if I wanted to hold one, but I'm good right here. So, my name is Samantha Osterloff, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is I have not had to use a mood or mind-altering substance since December 21st of 2011. And kind of what I want to do today here, and what kind of means a lot to me is I talked with Paige and I said, you know, what am I going to talk about? Am I just going to tell my story? Am I going to provide some type of education? Am I going to talk about, you know, what worked for me, like in my community to get well? And she said, you know, you can do all of that and put it together within 10 to 12 minutes. And I thought, awesome. So I did try to do that, and I obsessed about it a little today. So really, like I was introduced, my goal in life and my goal every day on a daily basis is to provide advocacy for those that need treatment and break down the stigma that's associated not only with addiction but with treatment. And I do believe that treatment works and recovery is 110% possible. Because for me, the life I have today, you know, I often hear people say, you know, drugs and alcohol took everything of meaning from my life. And that's true. It did that for me. But what drugs and alcohol did as a result of being an active person in long-term recovery is everything good in my life today I have as a result of my recovery. And I have my recovery as a result of going to treatment, being broken down enough, and making that decision to get well. And so when I say December 21st, 2011 is the last time that I had to use a mood or mind-altering substance, that's really what I mean. Because at the end, it was not a choice between whether or not I'm going to pick up. I had to use to get through the day. And so I'm just going to talk about a little bit about, you know, where I came from and kind of about my story. I took some notes. I'll probably follow it, but maybe not. So my story entering into recovery is I am a firm believer that without my local county legal system, my local crisis intervention at the hospital, and my parents really getting well and being ready to set down boundaries and they were ready to hold the boundary, because before I just used to like jump over it or like be really nasty until I got my own way. And my parents kind of like built up that strength to not allow me to do that, or if I was gonna do that, then like bye, you're gonna go do that by yourself. We're not gonna hang out with you for that show, because I would put on a show. And for me, my whole community in those aspects of the crisis intervention, the legal system, and my family kind of all came together, and that's kind of what pushed me into treatment and kind of made me realize how bad my life had really gotten. So like she said, I mean, for a long time, I didn't believe that treatment worked. I didn't know what recovery was or that it was possible. I grew up in a 2-parent household, middle class, suburbs, not what most people associate heroin addiction with. I'm hoping that they get more open these days with the fact that it's everywhere. But my life was pretty normal. You know, I had every possibility from my family. They gave me everything I needed. I was a spoiled brat, so not always everything I wanted, but I certainly was taken care of. I was an honor student. I did sports. I went to college. I did all this stuff. And somewhere along the way, I started to experiment. And it's the same story that a lot of my peers have. I'm really not that different, is that I start drinking, and then I smoke weed, and then I experiment with a bunch of other different chemicals, and then I come across opiates, and that's the love of my life. And I use until opiates, painkiller, prescription pain medication, until the point where I can't find it, and it's way too expensive. And so then I turn to heroin as soon as I'm introduced to it. And along the way, I'm still keeping everything on the outside okay. I got this really, I'm also, I suffer from codependency, which I'm also, steady working on always, is I had this really great boyfriend who sold drugs. And so for a long time, I didn't have to rob, cheat, or steal. And if I'm not robbing, cheating, stealing, taking money from my parents, I can keep everything on the outside pretty nice. And I'm a college student. I somehow got through 3 years of school. And so for a long time, and through that time, my parents would say, I think you have an issue, and I'd say, I'll go to outpatient, you guys will see. Or I'll try this medication, you guys will see. And I never really followed through with that, and I didn't really believe that the life of abstaining from the use of drugs and alcohol was real, or that it was possible. Now that's not to say that, like Devin mentioned with harm reduction, I'm all about harm reduction these days, but much like Devin, there were periods in my recovery where I wasn't as informed, which is also something I'm big into these days as well. So anyway, so I'm like living my life thinking everything is great. Having all these failed outpatient attempts. I'm like going to meetings, but like not really. And I'm back up at school and I get really, really sick. And I know I'm not withdrawal sick. And before I tell the story, I want you to keep in mind what you would think if you were a person who was not privy to what the disease of addiction does, that you're not privy to the fact that it's cunning, baffling, and powerful, and that maybe you believe that big circumstances that really affect someone's life, the fear of death, the birth of a child, the love of your family, is enough to get somebody into recovery and help them have a better life. So I go into the hospital and I'm put on life support, and my parents are informed that I'm an IV drug user. I have endocarditis, which is right side heart failure. I blew my tricuspid valves as a result of continued IV drug use. I had a blood clot in my lung. I was septic, and I had pneumonia, and I had a 10% chance to live. And at that time, my mother and father, like many parents, you just want to believe that your child's okay. Nobody wants to say, hey, my daughter's an IV drug user. They don't want to say that. And, my parents had to, be shocked and come to terms with the fact that my life wasn't what they thought it was on the outside. And so long story short on that one, I'm on life support for about 8 days. I'm in the hospital for another 2 months. I had to learn how to walk again because the infection hit my bones and my muscles. And in January of 2010, I had a tricuspid valve repair, open heart surgery at the age of 22. And again, if you think back to when I asked you to keep in mind, if you don't know much about the disease of addiction, and you would think to yourself, she's gonna get clean, life's gonna be great, she was scared to death. That's right. I did not, and I continued to use for another 2 years. And through that 2 years, I would try my first inpatient treatment, met a bunch of best friends and a boy. I got arrested. I was barely working. I was a college dropout. And I go back to school, pick up that boyfriend from treatment, and I end up getting pregnant. And then another person who's not very educated or is maybe a little ignorant to the severity of the disease would think, she's pregnant now, everything's gonna be great. It wasn't. And I had this delusion that I was gonna have this baby, I was gonna have this beautiful life with this man, and everything was gonna be great. And I'll tell you, that's not what happened, and thank God that it didn't. And my daughter was about 3 months old. I used for the first 3 months of her life. I can stand at the podium and tell you today that I put her in a lot of dangerous situations, and her life could have been taken from it. She was born with no effects from my unhealthy physical abusive relationship, from my continued drug use while pregnant, and from the abuse of a maintenance program while pregnant. And she was born perfect. She's an angel. Well, she's almost 7 now, so she's not an angel at all. But you get the point. And so, I didn't get clean after she was born. And I had used, the second weekend I was home, I'll hurry up here and get to the good stuff. And my mom caught me, because my mom always knew what I was doing, always knew where I was hiding my stuff somehow, maybe she had a camera, I don't know. But she caught me and I said, just don't tell my dad. And she told my dad, and I didn't know. And they started to get well. And on December 20th, 2011, I overdosed on my parents' couch in front of my daughter, and I woke up to a really nice police officer and a paramedic and my mother and my father, who said, I let this police officer know you're on probation? And the probation officer said, Merry Christmas. Your probation officer said, because I was already on probation, ARD, 3 days till I was off, so God's funny, and she said, you can go to treatment, not jail. And then I looked at my mom and thought, I'm going to do IOP. And she said, you're going to go to treatment or you're going to live on the street and I'll make sure you go to jail. But you will no longer affect the family the way that you are. It's time. And I went to treatment. And by the grace of God, I really hope that's the last treatment facility I ever enter. And, I went to the ER and crisis. I actually got to present, now I work in marketing and so I provide access to treatment, and I got to present yesterday to the crisis team that put me into treatment and helped save my life, which was yesterday. It was very surreal, bittersweet moment. And so, they weren't judging of me. He was kind, he was super sarcastic. It was like 2 a.m. And he's a great guy, and he helped me non-judgmentally get into treatment. And then, then I was on probation. And they wanted me to do treatment, and they wanted me to go to outpatient, and I did inpatient treatment, and I heard Mike talk a little bit about the continuum of care, and then I did outpatient treatment, and then I became super active in a 12-step fellowship, and as a result, my life started to change. And what I can tell you today is that I have this blessing of recovery, and I am not quiet about my recovery. If there's a mom at the post office who I even hear mention having a kid who's struggling, I say, hey, how's it going? And we start talking, because I just had this conversation with my mom the other day about a family member whose mother wants to be really quiet about the issues she's facing. And when we are quiet, we die. Because that's how severe this disease is and the epidemic. And so I'm never quiet about my recovery. I'm not quiet about it on social media. I'm not quiet about it when people ask for help. I'm not quiet about it when a mom tries to tell me her kid doesn't need treatment, but he's shooting heroin in her house, he's overdosed 3 times. I'm going to tell her about herself because I don't want that kid to die, and I don't want her to die as a result of him dying and live the rest of her life grieving the loss of her child. And so today, that's a big goal of mine, is to continue to advocate and stop the stigma. And my life's beautiful as a result of long-term recovery. I'm married in a healthy relationship. My husband's back there. He's got a nice navy blue suit on. My father's also here. He's one of my best friends.
Woo!
There he is. And me and my mom and dad talk on a daily basis. I'm an active participant in my nephew's lives, my brother, my sister. I've helped 2 of my cousins get into recovery. And so my greatest joy is just being a part of my family unit. And almost 7 years ago, I was ready to destroy it, for my own selfish well-being. I finished my bachelor's degree with honors in criminal justice, which is ironic, from Elizabethtown College. And tomorrow I walk across the stage as an honor graduate at St. Joe's with a master's in criminal justice and an emphasis in behavior management. And I did that working full-time with 2 kids and my husband, and being an active member in my own recovery. And this is the face that I want people to see in recovery. I don't want you to see, the mom crying on the TV because her kid died. I don't want you to see the person who robbed the Wawa. I want the community to see that people in recovery make change. And yesterday I actually signed up to be on Lebanon County's heroin task force, so I'm fired up to get in there and raise awareness for the community that I used in, the community that saved me, and the community that I got clean in. So, the message is hope, the promise is freedom, treatment works, recovery is possible. Thanks for letting me share.